So another screencast here, looking at the philosophers that we call the natural philosophers. The natural philosophers, or at least in Sophie's world, they're called the natural philosophers. The natural philosophers um, really wrote about quite a bit about the metaphysics of the world around them. That's what they were mostly interested in, is the essence of nature. But they certainly were epistemological as well. They thought about different ways of knowing the world. And the first natural philosopher we encounter is Democritus, or Democritus. And Democritus is somebody you will encounter probably next year in chemistry class. He believed that the world was made up of consistent, unchanging, unbreakable particles called atoms, and that change occurred through recombination of those atoms. And it turns out that that's not far off from what really actually is the character of the natural world based upon the scientific method. We do know that the world is made up of atoms. The one thing that he did not know was that atoms themselves are made up of smaller particles, and that atoms can change through a process of radioactive decay. But the word atom that we use in chemistry class today comes from Democritus. The essence of change is that the recombination of these atoms. So when one form of matter changes into another, it's because the atoms have recombined. He believed that the reason we know this is something we call rationalism. It just made good human sense. The reasons that he gave for his theory of the natural world consisting of atoms was proof enough, and this is called rationalism. When you think rationally, you're thinking according to reason. You're able to explain everything you see with a reason. So anyway, Democritus practiced rationalism as his epistemology, and he viewed the natural world as consisting of unchanging, unbreakable particles called atoms. So that's really what the key lesson from Democritus. A second natural philosopher, Thales, believed that really water was the source of all life. And that's actually, in a way, that's kind of true. All living things need water in one way or another. And we do believe that life on this planet did come from water originally. He also believed that everything was full of gods. In other words, all things had a sort of a spiritual essence, including and especially living things. And he called these things life germs. So Thales really contributed this idea that life comes from water. Another natural philosopher from the period, Anaximander, believed that our world was only one of many, that the world evolves and dissolves into something called the boundless. And the boundless you might think of as eternity or the universe, right? The boundless is to describe an endless space, and that our world comes into being and dissolves out of being. This is actually not too far removed from some Hindu mythology about worlds coming into being and going out of being. And the idea that the boundless is the source of creation is also somewhat fairly Hindu. Interestingly, very cutting-edge physics is exploring something called string theory. And we don't need to go into string theory here, but cutting-edge physics talks about string theory and how there might be parallel universes lying one right beside the other. And it's really kind of, it's one of these things that makes your mind hurt trying to figure it out. But Anaximander's philosophy does seem to line up a little bit with some modern scientific thinking. Very interesting that way. Anaximander. Not to be confused with Anaximander is Anaximenes. And he believed that the source of all things was vapor, that water was simply condensed air, and that all things are made of earth, air, all things are made of air, water, and fire. And that's not too far off when you really think about what Anaximenes might have been seeing. You light a fire under water and it boils away as vapor, kind of like air. So he kind of observes these changes just in the day-to-day, right? When you burn a log, it burns and turns into charcoal, and then smoke is given off that kind of looks like some kind of vapor, right? So there's a lot of different things here that we might say are consistent with the observed world. Parmenides is the next natural philosopher we would look at, and he was a rational thinker, like Democritus. Reason was the source of all knowledge. He believed that everything had always existed, that there was no beginning, and then therefore there is no end, if you try to contemplate the beginningness of something, it doesn't make any sense because it has always been there. And if you observe any changes, it wasn't that things were changing, it's that your observations of those things were changing. So it wasn't really necessarily that reality changes, but rather just the way we perceive it is changing. The next natural philosopher, Heraclitus. The essence of nature is flow. Things are constantly changing from one form to another, and that we know what something is because we know its opposite. And that kind of makes sense when you think about it, right? Hot, cold, war, peace. Think about how we understand things really depends upon its context. So, for example, during the school year, if you were able to sleep in an hour later than you normally do, let's say you normally wake up at 6:30 and you're able to sleep into 7:30, that hour is so valuable. In the summertime, if sleeping, let's say you usually sleep till 10 and you wake up at 11 instead, that hour isn't as valuable as that same hour in January, perhaps. He also was a rationalist. But interestingly, he believed reason was something like a god. He called it logos. Logos was a god that was sort of in your head, that controlled your thinking. Empedocles, very interesting thinker, a really cool name too. Water can't change into a butterfly, therefore there is more than one element in the universe. So he observed things that happened. We take a look at things and we see, hear, smell, touch, taste, and that's how we know what is happening or what things are made of. We are able to see earth, air, fire, and water because our eyes are made of the same thing. Change occurs because earth, air, fire, and water can recombine. Sort of like Democritus, in that the idea that change comes about because of the recombination of things. And then finally, Anaxagoras. He believed that nature is made up of minute particles. Each particle carries the essence of the whole substance. So kind of like Democritus, in that there is a lot of small particles, but that each particle was in and of itself really essentially the same as the whole. Now, modern day chemistry will tell you that a molecule of water is hydrogen and oxygen combined. Hydrogen is in and of itself not water, nor is oxygen, but when they combine, they become water. So modern day science would tell you something a little different than what Anaxagoras would claim. Anaxagoras would believe that everything is made up of small particles, and each thing is comprised of the whole. So to a certain extent, this is kind of like when we think of DNA in a cell, right? The essence of the entire body is contained in every one of our cells. You may know that from life science you've taken in 8th grade or whenever you last took life science, that the code for our entire body is contained in every single one of our cells. So these are the natural philosophers treated very quickly. We will come back to these, and again, Democritus. You have this chart to look at. We'll be coming back and revisiting these. You'll be referring to these philosophers when you write your philosophy essay, which is the assessment for this unit.